The private room smelled like citrus cleaner and old confidence, the kind of place that tried to convince you it was expensive through silence alone. No music, no windows, just soft lighting and polished wood that reflected back a version of yourself you didn't quite recognize. Everyone spoke a little louder than necessary, like they were afraid of being mistaken for people who didn't belong there. My sister sat at the center of the table. She always did, not by request, by gravity. Conversations bent toward her, compliments orbited her, even the servers seemed to approach her first, as if she were the one who could approve or deny their existence. She was celebrating what she called a launch, a small feature in a regional magazine, 2 pages, 1 full-spread photo, the kind of thing that came with buzzwords but no numbers. She spoke about it like it was inevitable proof that everything she'd ever believed about herself was finally being validated by the universe. I nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected, sipped water because it gave my hand something to do. Across the table my mother stood. She didn't ask for attention. She assumed it. She lifted her glass and tapped it with her fork, just once. Sharp, practiced. The room obeyed immediately. "To courage," she said, her voice warm in that rehearsed way that photographs well. "To ambition, to the one person in this family who has never been afraid to chase something bigger than herself." Applause followed, automatic, predictable. My sister beamed. I clapped too. It felt like watching my own hands from a distance. Then the waiter arrived. He didn't go to my parents, didn't glance at my sister. He walked straight toward me and set a leather folder beside my glass with the careful neutrality of someone delivering something fragile. I opened it. The number sat there, heavy and unblinking. $3,487.62. It wasn't the amount that froze me. It was the confidence behind it. No question, no discussion. Just an assumption that had already calcified into fact. My mother leaned toward me before I could speak. Her perfume, expensive, floral, faintly aggressive, reached me before her voice did. "You have the most stable income," she whispered, her hand landing lightly on my forearm. A gesture meant to look affectionate but felt like ownership. "This is what family does." She smiled as if the matter were settled. I looked at her hand, then at the folder, then at my sister, still basking in applause that hadn't quite finished dying down. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I closed the folder slowly and slid it across the table until it touched the stem of my mother's wineglass. The sound it made, soft, deliberate, cut through the room. Conversation stopped, not gradually. Instantly, the kind of silence that doesn't drift in but slams down. My mother stared at the folder as if it had moved on its own. My sister's smile faltered, just slightly, like a mask losing its grip. "I think," I said, standing surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "that the event should cover its own expenses." No one spoke. I didn't wait for permission. I walked past the table, past the host stand, past the mirrors that reflected a dozen versions of me leaving all at once. Outside, the night air hit my face hard and cold, sharp enough to reset something inside my chest. I breathed. Behind me, my partner opened the car door without a word. The drive home was quiet, not awkward quiet, not angry quiet, intentional. I watched streetlights slide past the window and waited for the familiar feeling, the rush of guilt, the reflex to apologize, the itch to fix whatever discomfort I'd caused. It never came. Instead, there was something else, stillness. But from recognition. This wasn't generosity. It was self-erasure disguised as responsibility. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and for the first time in years, went to bed without planning how to fix anyone else's life the next morning. Outside, the city moved on without me. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. The bill wasn't just a bill. It was a mirror, and I had finally looked long enough to see what was really being reflected. The silence lasted exactly 9 hours. That's how long it took for restraint to lose its disguise and reveal what it really was. Strategy. By morning, my phone had warmed the table beneath it. Missed calls stacked like unanswered dares. Messages arrived in waves, not frantic, not panicked, measured, deliberate. Each one calibrated to press a different pressure point. My mother started softly. "I barely slept. We need to talk. Families don't treat each other like this." My father followed, more blunt. "You crossed a line. This isn't how adults handle conflict." My sister waited the longest. She always did. She liked to arrive after the narrative had already been shaped. "I don't even recognize you anymore. Do you know how humiliating that was for me?" I read them without reacting. That felt new, observing without responding, like watching a storm through glass instead of standing in it. What struck me wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't. No one asked why I'd refused. No one asked if something had changed. No one asked what I needed. The assumption was unanimous. Whatever I was feeling was irrelevant compared to the inconvenience I'd caused. I made coffee and stood at the counter, phone face down again, steam curling into the quiet kitchen. My partner moved around behind me, unhurried, careful not to intrude. "They're going to escalate," he said gently. "I know." And they did. By noon, the tone shifted from concern to correction. "This isn't like you. You're being dramatic. You always do this when you're stressed." That one landed differently, because it wasn't anger, it was erasure. The subtle rewriting of history where my reaction became the problem, not the behavior that provoked it. A familiar move, one I'd fallen for more times than I could count. I scrolled further back through the messages, not just from today, but months, years. Patterns emerged once I stopped excusing them, requests that weren't framed as requests, gratitude that expired quickly, affection that appeared only after compliance. Support apparently had terms and conditions. Mid-afternoon, my sister called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail instead, voice trembling just enough to sound wounded, not enough to lose control. "I defended you," she said. "Do you know that? I told people you were just overwhelmed, but now they think we're unstable. Investors don't like instability." There it was. Not "you hurt me, you endangered me." My refusal hadn't embarrassed her. It had disrupted her image, and that apparently was unforgivable. I deleted the voicemail without replying. The rest of the day passed in a strange calm. I worked, I ate, I folded laundry. Each normal task felt faintly unreal, like I was moving through a life that had quietly switched owners overnight. That evening, I opened the spreadsheet again. This time I wasn't adding numbers. I was adding context. I labeled a new section "Patterns of Expectation." The first entry surprised me, not because it was dramatic but because it was small, age 19, expected to contribute a little to groceries. Contribution never ended. Then another, age 23, first full-time job, became emergency contact for entire family. Then another, age 27, stopped being asked, started being told. Line by line, a structure revealed itself. Not chaos, not dysfunction, a system. One where my reliability was treated as an infinite resource, one where my boundaries were interpreted as malfunctions, one where my value was measured almost entirely by what I could absorb. That night the calls resumed, this time from my father. I answered. "We need to resolve this," he said without greeting. "Your mother is beside herself." "I'm sure she is. This isn't who you are." There it was again, the insistence that my resistance was a deviation, not a decision. "I think it is," I said calmly. Silence followed. Short, sharp. "Are you trying to punish us?" "No," I replied. "I'm trying to stop. That doesn't make sense." "It does to me." He sighed, the sound thick with disappointment that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with access being threatened. "You've always been sensitive," he said finally. "You take things too personally." I almost laughed because suddenly I could see it for what it was, not an observation but a containment strategy. If my feelings were framed as flaws, they could be dismissed without engagement. "I'm not taking this personally," I said. "I'm taking it seriously." He hung up, not in anger, in withdrawal. The kind meant to make me feel small enough to chase him. I didn't. Instead, I sat on the couch and stared at the dark screen of my phone, waiting for the familiar ache to bloom. It didn't. What I felt instead was something colder, steadier, resolve. For the first time, I understood that the backlash wasn't proof I'd done something wrong. It was proof that I'd disrupted something that benefited them. That night, as I turned off the lights, I realized something else too, something unsettling and liberating all at once. They weren't angry because I'd said no. They were angry because I'd said no without asking permission. And once that door closed, I knew with a certainty that surprised me. They were going to try everything to force it back open. There's a strange clarity that comes after you stop reacting. Not peace, clarity. It feels less like relief, and more like waking up in a room you've lived in for years and suddenly noticing the walls were never straight. The angles don't line up. The doors aren't where you thought they were, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. I spent the next few days not talking to my family. That silence wasn't dramatic, it wasn't strategic, it was diagnostic. I wanted to know what would happen if I didn't rush in to stabilize the emotional tempera. Tour of the room. The answer was, nothing good. Messages continued, but they changed shape. When urgency failed, they tried nostalgia. When nostalgia failed, they tried guilt. When guilt failed, they tried authority. Remember everything we've done for you. You were breaking your mother's heart. This is bigger than you. Each line was familiar, not just in content but in rhythm, like a song I'd been humming my entire life without realizing I'd learned it somewhere. That's when I understood something unsettling. This wasn't a conflict, it was a script, and I had been cast in the same role for decades. The dependable one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't need much. I had mistaken endurance for maturity, thought that being low maintenance meant being evolved, that not asking for help made me strong. But strength, I was learning, isn't how much you can carry. It's how much you refuse to carry once you realize it was never yours. I went back to the spreadsheet, not the numbers this time, but the margins, the spaces between the entries, the emotional residue that never quite faded even after the money was gone. There was a pattern there, too. Every time I gave, the relief was temporary, short-lived, like pressing a snooze button on a fire alarm. The noise stopped, but the danger didn't. I started researching, not because I needed validation, but because I needed language. What I found wasn't new psychology. It wasn't obscure. It was painfully obvious once I saw it. There's a behavioral trap where people convince themselves that consistency will eventually be rewarded, even when all evidence points to the opposite, that if you keep investing in a losing structure long enough, the structure will eventually change out of gratitude or exhaustion or fate. It doesn't, it adapts. It learns how much you were willing to give without breaking, and then it takes exactly that. I hadn't been unlucky. I had been predictable. That realization hurt more than any accusation they'd thrown at me, because it meant no one had forced me into this role. I had volunteered over and over, not consciously, not dramatically, but through 1,000 small decisions where saying yes felt safer than risking disapproval, where being needed felt better than being ignored, where giving felt like proof that I mattered. I remembered being 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while my parents argued in the other room. I remembered deciding, quietly, efficiently, that if I could just stay calm enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, things wouldn't fall apart. That decision had worked. For everyone else, it had cost me everything else. That night, my sister tried a new tactic. She didn't accuse. She didn't demand. She apologized. "I didn't realize you felt this way," she wrote. "I guess I've always thought you were just better at handling things." There it was, not gratitude, delegation, the compliment that doubles as a confession. I typed a response, deleted it, typed again. Deleted that too, because I finally understood what I'd been chasing all these years. Not fairness, not repayment, permission to stop, permission to be ordinary, to be imperfect, to need things without earning them first. But permission never comes from the people who benefit from your silence. It comes when you revoke their authority to grant it. The next morning, I noticed something subtle but profound. I wasn't tired, not physically, not emotionally. For years, exhaustion had been my baseline, a constant low-grade depletion I'd mistaken for adulthood. But now, without the daily drain of emotional anticipation, my body felt neutral, like it had been bracing for impact that never came. That's when it clicked. I hadn't been tired because I worked too hard. I'd been tired because I was always on call, always anticipating the next need, the next crisis, the next expectation disguised as an emergency. And when I stopped answering, the world didn't collapse. It reorganized. My phone buzzed once that afternoon. A message from my mother. "We need to come over and talk this through. Sunday, don't make this harder than it needs to be. No question mark." I stared at the screen. Old reflexes stirred. Anxiety, obligation, the urge to prepare, to script, to soften. Then I felt something else. Readiness. I replied with a single word, "Fine." And for the first time, I didn't mean "I'll fix this." I meant I'm finished pretending I don't see the pattern. I closed the laptop. Outside, the light was changing. Late afternoon sliding toward evening. The kind of transition you don't notice until it's already happened. I realized then that understanding the pattern, wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something much harder, because once you name the game, you don't get to keep playing it. And on Sunday, they were coming over. Sunday arrived without ceremony. No storm. No dramatic sky, just ordinary daylight that felt almost insulting in its calm. The kind of day that suggested nothing irreversible was about to happen. I cleaned the apartment out of habit, not nerves. Straightened the couch cushions, wiped the counter. Small gestures of order that gave my hands something to do while my mind stayed sharp. They didn't ask if they could come over. They told me, "We'll be there at 3. At 2:58, my phone buzzed. We're downstairs." I stood for a moment in the entryway, hand on the door handle, noticing how my body felt. No racing heart, no shallow breath, just tension, coiled and ready, like a wire pulled tight. When I opened the door, they walked in like they owned the place. My father first, solid, authoritative, already irritated that this wasn't happening on his terms. My mother followed, purse clutched high against her chest, face composed into something between concern and indictment. My sister came last, oversized sunglasses still on, as if emotion were sumped. She could accessorize. No greetings, no coats removed. They moved straight to the living room and sat. "Sit," my father said. I didn't. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it instead, arms crossed, waiting. That alone changed the temperature of the room. "This doesn't need to be a big thing," my mother began, voice measured. "We're here to clear the air." "I'm sure you are," I said. My sister pulled off her sunglasses dramatically and sighed. "I just want us to move forward. Private room deposit, future date hold, $1,500. My stomach had dropped when I first noticed it. My voice didn't. "Can someone explain this?" I asked. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the page, then froze. That must be a mistake." "I called the restaurant," I said evenly. "They confirmed it." Silence fell, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was recognition. My father shifted, my sister frowned, my mother's eyes darted between us, calculating. "It's just a hold," she said quickly, "in case we decide to do something small next month." "For your anniversary," I said. She flinched. "The one you told me was canceled because money was tight." My sister turned toward her. "You said you weren't doing anything." "We didn't want to burden you," my mother said too quickly. "You've been so stressed." I laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just once. "You didn't want to burden me," I repeated, "so you put a $1,500 deposit on my card." My father cleared his throat. "That's not the point. It's exactly the point." I pulled out the next document, the spreadsheet, 5 pages, single-spaced. I placed it on the table between us and let go. "This is everything I've paid for in the last 5 years," I said. "Money, services, support." My sister scoffed. "This is so petty." "Read it," I said. She didn't. My father did. His face changed as his eyes moved down the page, not with shame but with irritation, like someone discovering terms they hadn't bothered to read. "This is what family does," he said sharply. "We raised you. And I've been repaying that debt ever since," I said, "with interest." I flipped to the final page and tapped the total, $41,982.17. "That's the financial part," I said. "It doesn't include time or energy or opportunities I turned down so I could stay available." My mother stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You're acting like a victim." "No," I said. "I'm acting like someone who noticed the withdrawals." She stared at me, shocked, not by the accusation but by the calm behind it. "We can work this out," she said, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. "There is nothing to work out." My father stood too, anger flashing now. "You don't get to rewrite history." "I'm not rewriting it," I said. "I'm finally reading it." They looked at me then, not as a daughter, not as a sister, as a problem, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to solve myself. I felt something else entirely, finality. Because the discovery wasn't just the deposit. It was the truth behind it. They hadn't made a mistake. They had made a plan. And I was never meant to know. They were still standing when I spoke again, not because they were ready to leave, because they were waiting for me to fold. That had always been the rhythm. Pressure, pause, rescue. I could almost see the invisible countdown ticking in their heads, the moment when I would soften, apologize, and offer a compromise that cost me more than them. I didn't. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out the final pages. "These," I said, laying them flat on the table, "are not about money. They didn't look, so I read them aloud. The weekend I missed my own birthday dinner because someone needed help moving at the last minute. My sister opened her mouth. I kept going. The vacation I canceled to cover a crisis that resolved itself 2 days later. My mother shook her head. You're exaggerating. The promotion I didn't celebrate because we were too busy discussing someone else's setback. My father slammed his hand on the back of the chair. Enough. No, I said quietly, this is the part that usually gets skipped. I looked at each of them in turn, slow and deliberate. For years I thought I was being selfless, I continued. I told myself this was love, that if I kept giving eventually it would even out. I paused. It never did. My sister crossed her arms. So what, you're cutting us off over one dinner? This isn't about dinner, I said. It's about access. My father scoffed. You're being dramatic. No, I replied. I'm being precise. I took a step closer, not threatening, certain. I am no longer available for emergency funding. I am no longer the default solution. I will not be covering expenses, smoothing conflicts, or absorbing consequences that aren't mine. My mother's voice cracked. You can't just abandon your family. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said. I'm stepping out of a role I was never asked if I wanted. There it was, the truth that made them uncomfortable, because roles like mine only work if they're assumed, not negotiated. My father's voice dropped, dangerous now. You owe us. I met his gaze. I don't. The words didn't shake, they landed. You chose to have a child, I continued. I chose to help, and I am choosing to stop. Silence followed, not stunned, but recalibrating. They were adjusting tactics in real time. My mother reached into her purse, pulling out a familiar expression, tears that arrived on cue. After everything we've done, this is how you repay us? I didn't flinch. I'm not repaying anything, I said. I'm closing an account. I gestured toward the door. You're done using my credit, my time, and my emotional labor, effective immediately. My sister laughed sharply. You think you're in control here? Yes, I said simply, because I'm the one with the boundaries. That was the moment something shifted. They realized the leverage was gone. My father straightened slowly. He reached into his pocket and placed a key on the coffee table. The sound it made was small, but final. If you're going to be like this, he said, don't expect us to be around. I don't, I replied. They stared at me, searching for regret. They didn't find it. One by one they left. No shouting, no reconciliation, no dramatic last words, just the quiet retreat of people who had lost access to something they'd assumed was permanent. When the door closed behind them, the apartment felt different, larger. I sat down, not from weakness, but because there was nothing left to hold myself upright against. My hands rested in my lap, still steady. I didn't cry. What I felt wasn't grief. It was relief edged with mourning, not for who they were, but for who I had been while trying to keep them comfortable. That night I slept deeply. No buzzing phone, no waiting for impact, just rest, because the reckoning wasn't about punishment. It was about reality finally being acknowledged, and once acknowledged, it couldn't be undone. The first thing I noticed was the quiet, not the fragile kind that feels like it's waiting to be broken, but a settled quiet. The kind that exists when nothing is circling you anymore, when no one is preparing to ask for something you'll feel guilty refusing. Days passed, then weeks. My phone stayed dark. At first that absence felt unreal, like standing in a room after a machine shuts off and realizing you'd forgotten how loud it had been. For years, noise had been proof of relevance. If someone needed me, I mattered. If no one called, something must be wrong. Now, nothing called, and nothing was wrong. I expected grief to ambush me, on the subway, in the grocery store, at night when the lights were off. I expected to miss them in the way people talk about missing family. What came instead was space, mental space, emotional space. Time that didn't immediately fill itself with obligation. I began to notice how much of my life had been reactive, how rarely I'd asked myself what I wanted to do on a free evening, because free evenings were always provisional, subject to cancellation if someone else's need rose high enough. Now, my plans stayed where I put them. I opened my banking app one morning and stared at the numbers longer than necessary. The balance was climbing, not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. No unexplained dips, no emergency transfers, no quiet resentment attached to each withdrawal. The drain had stopped, and with it, the background anxiety I hadn't realized I was carrying everywhere. I updated my budget, canceled subscriptions that were never mine, removed recurring payments that had once felt too awkward to question. Each click felt like reclaiming a square inch of ground. I wasn't getting rich, I was getting free. The spreadsheet still lived on my laptop, but it no longer felt charged. I opened it once more, not to add, not to edit, but to look. The numbers were just numbers now. Historical data. Evidence of a system that no longer existed. I archived the file, closed it. And that was that. One evening, my partner stood in the kitchen, flipping through travel options on his phone. He looked up casually. "So," he said, "if we go anywhere this year, where do you want it to be?" The question stopped me, not because I didn't have an answer, because no one had asked it without conditions be. I thought for a moment. Really thought. Not about what would look good in photos, not about what anyone else might expect. "I want somewhere unfamiliar," I said finally. "Somewhere that doesn't know me as the responsible one." He smiled. "Done." The choice felt symbolic, even if it didn't need to be. A few days later, a message came through, one line: "We miss you," no apology, no acknowledgement, no accountability, just an invitation back into the role. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something that would have once been unthinkable. I didn't respond. Silence, I had learned, is not cruelty, it's clarity. Months passed. My life didn't become perfect. There were still hard days, still doubts, still moments when I wondered if I'd been too harsh, too final, too much. But every time that thought surfaced, I checked the evidence. Not their words, not my fear, but my body. I was sleeping better, laughing more easily, planning without contingency clauses. The cost of my decision had been real. I had lost people, lost the illusion of unconditional support, lost the version of family I'd been trying to earn since childhood, but the cost of staying would have been higher. I would have lost myself completely. One night, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I looked tired but clear, older in a way that felt earned, no longer bracing, no longer waiting. I closed the screen, the account was closed, the balance was zero, and for the first time in my life, everything I had, my time, my energy, my money, was finally mine. If you've ever felt like an ATM for people who treat you like an inconvenience, know this. You are not selfish for stopping, you are not cruel for choosing yourself. You are not required to finance someone else's comfort with your peace. Some debts are imaginary, some roles are inherited, and some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened to prove you did the right thing. Sometimes the quiet afterward is the proof.